Erev Tov, everybody. We are on to Parashat Vayetzei, and we've done a couple of the Rab Meidan essays here, and this one jumped out at me, Ahavat Yaakov LeRachel, Yaakov's love for Rachel. It's on the slightly longer side, and one of those where there's occasional references to a different spot in Tanakh or Chazal, but mostly he's staying on the page and trying to dig a little deeper, tie together a few threads in the story. Again, no big earth-shattering chidush in this one, but an opportunity for us to kind of reflect on the greater context of Yaakov's relationships with his wives and the impact that has on the family structure. So I'll share my screen and we'll get started. Okay. Starting with Hasheilot, the questions. He quotes excerpts, psukim from chapter 29 as Yaakov meets and then lobbies for Rachel. And here are those psukim. When Yaakov saw Rachel, the daughter of Lavan, the brother of his mother, and saw the sheep of Lavan, the brother of his mother, Yaakov drew near, rolled the stone off the mouth of the well, and gave water to the sheep of Lavan, the brother of his mother. He kissed Rachel, lifted up his voice and cried, and told Rachel that he was the brother of her father, and that he was the son of Rivka. And she ran and told her father. And then continuing a little bit later, Lavan had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were, many translations for this, rakot, and Rachel, and Rachel was beautiful in description and appearance. Yaakov loved Rachel and said, I'll work 7 years, said to Lavan, I'll work 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. He worked those 7 years for Rachel, and they were like a few days in his eyes in his love for her. These psukim which are in front of us express a burning love, yokedet, ahava yokedet, like eish al hamizbeach tukadbo, the fire should burn on the altar, a burning love of Yaakov for Rachel. The central reason for this love, which is mentioned in the psukim, is Rachel's beauty. But of course, a love which is dependent on the beauty of a woman holds for a limited amount of time. And indeed, the partnered life of Yaakov and Rachel was filled with crises. Even if those crises were not enormous or many, it seems like they impacted this great love, which is described in the 7 years of labor that preceded the marriage. So Rab Meidan, this opening contention is, if we take the psukim at their word, Yaakov loves Rachel for her beauty. That's what the sages call in Pirkei Avot Ahava shetluya badavar, a kind of contingent love, and it's one which may not be able to outlast either the waning of the beauty or difficult circumstances. And at the outset, Rab Meidan sort of wants to set up the possibility that it is really challenged by the challenges that they experience in their relationship. The first challenge or crisis pertains to Rachel's inability to bear children. Quoting from chapter 30, the next chapter at the beginning, Rachel saw that she had not bore children to Yaakov. She was jealous of her sister. She said to Yaakov, give me children. If not, I'll die. Yaakov got angry at Rachel and said, am I in God's place? Who is withholding from you the fruit of your womb? Rab Meidan says, the sages criticized Yaakov's response. Quote the pasuk, Yaakov got angry at Rachel. God said to him, says the Midrash, this is how we respond to people, in great distress. by your life, your children will stand before her children, or before her son, really. Your children will stand before her son. So somehow Yaakov's insensitivity to Rachel's plight gets punished with some sense of the child that she ultimately has having some kind of primacy of place over the other children that he has. That midrash bears lots of analysis on its own right, but what Rav Meidan wants to draw out from here is that the sages see his response as insensitive and put a critique of that insensitivity in God's mouth. On the other hand, he goes on to say, the sages also criticize Rachel for her behavior. Later on in the same chapter, when Rachel is still trying to conceive, and Leah comes with these perhaps fertility strengthening things that she got from Reuven in the field, Rachel says to Leah, please give me from your sons, they're often translated as mandrakes. And Leah says, it's enough that you've taken my husband, you're also going to take these mandrakes of my son. Rachel says, okay, Yaakov will lie with you tonight in exchange for these mandrakes. And the sages expound or interpret, Ulafisha zilzala b'mishkav hatzadik, because Rachel was, dismissive of the opportunity to lie with Yaakov, the tzaddik, her husband, but the tzaddik, she did not merit to be buried with him. Right? Interesting kind of contrast to the way we read Yaakov's purchase of Marat Machpelah in Rav Meidan's essay last week, that it was sort of a expression of commitment to Sarah, to the continuation of their relationship even after death. And here there's sort of a sense that because of Rachel's dismissal of Yaakov's partnership with her in life, she didn't merit to be buried with him in death. So here is a set of comments of Chazal, one which sort of criticizes Yaakov for his response to Rachel's infertility, and then also one which sort of criticizes Rachel for her lack of strong commitment to their relationship, meaning almost her desire to have a child, potentially linked to her relationship with him, but also somehow independent, is being placed before somehow her respect of him, love of him, their relationship, their partnership, something like that. So this is sort of crisis number one in their relationship. Again, no other than introducing the words of Chazal here, Rav Meidan's not adding that much, but what we're seeing is he's going to kind of lay out a backdrop or tapestry of the challenges in their relationship. Beyond the tension around the infertility, we have two additional crises in the bond between Yaakov and Rachel. One is the kind of sharp words that Yaakov offers regarding the theft of these trafim, Laban's house idols, which in some way brought about the untimely death of Rachel. When Yaakov says to Laban, whoever these gods are found with will not live. Recognize, what I have, take note of what I have and take anything from it, meaning I don't have it here with me. And Yaakov did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So he didn't know, but he still utters this kind of curse or promise or implicit punishment, which kind of takes hold of Rachel. And the second additional crisis, which Rashi mentions, has to do with their potential joint burial. The joint burial is expressed from the time of the purchase of Marat Machpelah and by Avraham at the time of Sarah's death, And it expresses this eternal covenant between husband and wife, as we talked about last week. But now take a look at what Yaakov charges his sons. He instructs them and says, this is already all the way forward in the end of Breshit and Vayechi in chapter 49, says to them, I'm going to be gathered to my people, or I'm being gathered to my people, meaning I'm dying. Bury me with my ancestors. The cave, into the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite. That's where they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. That's where they buried Yitzchak and Rivka, his wife. And that's where I buried Leah. Leah is buried with Yaakov in Marat Machpelah, whereas Rachel is left alone in the grave, the burial place, which is on the way to Ephrat. Did the beauty? So this is again taking a pause and summarizing. What Rav Meidan wants to suggest here is that we have a number of crises in their relationship in which we see, and again, the middle one is a little challenging to critique Yaakov for, because he doesn't know that Rachel stole them. So I don't know exactly how Rav Meidan could kind of legitimately include it, but these set of things point to, external challenges in their relationship that uncover tensions and shortcomings somehow in their love for one another. Isaac, hold on one second, just finish to the next little stopping point, and then I'll circle back to you. So now Rav Meidan wants to ask the question: did Rachel's beauty blind the eyes? Potent language for our patriarchs, especially in light of Yaakov's blindness. Did Rachel's beauty blind the eyes of our father Yaakov, kind of from examining how fit they were, how well matched they were? And is it possible that over the years of their marriage, it became clear that this wasn't such a burning love as it seems to be in the beginning? Okay, obviously he now answers, Chas v'chalila, God forbid, you can't imagine such a thing would be true. But and now he's going to argue why. But of course, I don't know, he builds a case, and it's worth reflecting on and considering. Now he's going to bring up the other side of the argument, and maybe we'll leave us, or ourselves, to consider the evidence on each side. So he says, heaven forfend, the psukim themselves teach us that Yaakov's love for Rachel, was not diminished till his very last day. How do we know? At the moment of the fateful meeting of Yaakov and his household with Esav in Vayishlach, this is the next Parashah, chapter 33 at the beginning. Yaakov lifted up his eyes and saw Esav was coming with 400 men. He divides the children with Leah and Rachel and the two maidservants. Maidservants and their children are first. Leah and her children are behind them, and Rachel and Yosef behind them. The security, safety being in the very back was not great, but it certainly was the most safe spot of all the ones that Yaakov had in front of him. And that relatively safest position, he designates for Rachel and for her son. That's number one. Number two, at the time of the debate, or the argument really, over whether Binyamin will go down to Mitzrayim, Yaakov says to his children, and he said, your servant, my father, said to us, that my wife bore me 2 children. Implication, even after her death, only Rachel is called the wife of Yaakov. And even at the time of going down to Egypt, Rachel is the only one who is called in the list of all those who go down to Egypt, Eshet Yaakov, the wife of Yaakov. So we have this sense from description that Rachel stands out as the favored wife of Yaakov. And 3, Yaakov's great love for Yosef and Binyamin was something we will, examine, God willing, in the coming parashiot. But there's no doubt that it also stems from the great love that Yaakov loved Rachel with. It's possible that even burying her in on the way to Ephrat was not a crack in the wall of their love, but actually a tremendous sign of the strength of their love, something which we'll deal with, God willing, in Parashat Vayishlach. So he even comes back around to one of the things he attempted to argue as a indication of lack of love, and suggests that he will later prove that it's an indication of their love. So I think all of this is to say, I'm neither compelled by his arguments about the weakness of their love, nor about the strength of their love. We don't have a lot of data, and what we have can be read in different directions. And I think it's interesting to open up the question, and at least to really point out perhaps the descriptions of love of Yaakov for Rachel are more explicit, expansive than almost any other, in Bereshit or in the Chumash. And is that borne out over the rest of their relationship or not? We have, say, panim lakan or lakan, possibilities in each direction. Isaac, did you want to comment?
I just had a question regarding the mandrakes, where Rachel is punished for that. What would be the reason for that, being that the mandrakes actually were a way for her to, not only conceive, but also, to obviously have relations with Yaakov. So,
yeah, it's a great question. I didn't follow up and look at that Rashi other than the quote here. I wondered the same thing. Right, if they were somehow a fertility thing, then we would expect they would be taken together with, cohabiting with Yaakov, and somehow, so it's not. I think the point that you're making, which I agree with, is it's not in disservice to her sleeping with Yaakov. It's in service of her sleeping with Yaakov. But somehow the fact that she offers giving him up even one night, even for the purpose of then taking these mandrakes, which she would use to increase her fertility in her relationship with him, I think still somehow I think the critique is somehow that it's prioritizing bearing children with him over just being with him, or something, something to that effect. So I agree. I think it's a good question. It's subtle, but I think if I understand what we're meant to understand the dudaim to be, I think that's the idea, that, even if it meant, not being as fertile, she should not have passed up this opportunity for their togetherness. Great. Any other comments before we keep going to the next section? Yeah, David L.
I'm a little surprised that Rav Meidan doesn't want to divide the concept of ahava into multiple concepts.
Mm-hmm.
There certainly are lots of different ways of love, and it would be so simple and obvious to talk about passion,
mm-hmm.
and to talk about a unified partnership based on shared values. And the best example, I think, is the example of the Trafim, where it doesn't even occur to Yaakov that somebody in his household could have stolen the Trafim, otherwise he wouldn't have said what he said.
Right.
And what it reflects is not the fact that he didn't have a passionate relationship with Rachel or a loving relationship with Rachel, but it shows that the foundation of their relationship maybe was in that regard, in terms of worldview, that they were not in a unified place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Or I would tweak. I would say a slightly different version of that last piece. So maybe they didn't communicate about everyday affairs, or even maybe slightly more, sublime affairs, with regularity or consistency or clarity or something like that. But either way, I think you're giving a lovely answer. No pun intended after the fact, I guess. And good. Like I would always say, this is the goal of Rav Meidan: collect up the data and allow us to offer our own answers. To your question of why doesn't he make those distinctions, I'm not sure. It would seem consistent with his approach to at least offer something by way of distinction, and we don't really see that. He seems to be asking like a overly simplistic question and then giving an overly simplistic answer is what it feels like to me, on the face of it. But I appreciate and agree with the potential distinctions that you're suggesting. Great. Let's go on a little more. Yofian shel ha'imahot, the beauty of the matriarchs. total side grammatical note. It's not clear to me, and there are some articles in the Academia Lelashon Ha'ivrit about this, how we came to say imahot and not imot. If av or abba takes avot, aim or ima seems like it should take emot. Some people have suggested this somehow has to do with like influence of the Aramaic. I'm not sure. I'm so used to saying avot and imahot that it rolls off the tongue, and avot and emot seems a little funny. But in a Mishaberach we'll say avotenu Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov v'imotenu, not imahotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel B'Leah. So for those who are grammatically inclined in that way, you can chew on that. Okay, beauty of the matriarchs. What is the Torah coming to teach us when it says about Sarah, that Avram recognized that she was a Isha Yefat Mareh, a beautiful woman? When it says about Rivka that she was Tovat Mareh Ma'od, very fine of appearance. And when it says about Rachel that she was Yefat Toar Yefat Mareh, again, these descriptors of beauty. The accepted answer to this question is a natural hatama, matching consistency between the container and the wine which is in it, between the outer wrapping of a person, the beauty of their physicality, and the light of the Shekhinah which shines inside a person. Quoting from Kohelet 8a, the wisdom of a person lights their face, and the strength or might of their face will change. So I don't know what makes this the tshuva hamikubelet. It certainly sits well, but somehow drawing off of this line from Kohelet, Rav Meidan wants to somehow suggest that, especially from this first half, chokhmat adam ta'ir panav, that some more, values-based or spiritual quality that's inside is what will shine out and appear on a person's person, and that's what beauty ultimately reflects. That's his first. That's his first possibility. This answer, that again, when the Torah says that the matriarchs were beautiful, it's referring to a consistency of inner and outer beauty, is certainly correct. But in the portions that refer to the matriarchs, it's possible that there's a kind of idiosyncratic particular answer for each one of them. For Sarah, the answer is clear in the Torah. It's because of her beauty that the kings like Paro and Avimelech desired her, and this created, put Abraham as well into a tricky situation. Yitzchak also almost got caught up in trouble because of Rivka, his attractive wife, when he came to dwell in Gerar. But the Torah, so that could be the case. So again, the beauty of Sarah is a physical thing which is being told about. If the question is, if Rav Meidan's question is, what is the Torah trying to teach us? So the first thing he's saying is, consistently, beauty in the Torah is a description of a consistent inner and outer, matching inner and outer quality. Now he's coming to say, but the mention of it in the cases of the imahot, it plays a particular plot role in each one. In Sarah, it's to foreshadow, the difficulties that, the physical beauty which leads to particular challenges for her and for Abraham. That's relevant for Yitzchak also, but the Torah speaks about Rivka's beauty also in the previous section when Eliezer Eved Abraham brings her to Yitzchak, right? So if its plot role in the stories of Abraham and Sarah have to do with their relationship to other kings and what vulnerable positions that could put Sarah in, because that's when it's first mentioned, then the fact that it's mentioned about Rivka in that circumstance as well is relevant, but not fully, doesn't explain the whole thing, because her beauty is mentioned when she's being selected for Yitzchak to be a wife, which is earlier. So it's possible that Rivka's beauty is relevant for the following reason: when she comes to home from Lavan's house, Betuel and Lavan's house, really Betuel's house, and she meets Yitzchak, we're told. Yitzchak brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and he took Rivka to be a wife to him and loved her, and he was comforted after the death of, after the loss of his mother. Yitzchak's love for Rivka rests to a significant degree on the fact that her appearance reflected in some way that of his mother, Sarah. The appearance of Sarah was reflected in, or the image or character almost, it's kind of a play, I think, on both appearance and character of Sarah was reflected in Rivka's behavior. As Chazal say in the Midrash about the cloud, which was always kind of present over Sarah's tent, and the light which was always burning in Sarah's tent, these things had abated after the death of Sarah, and they resumed with Rivka's arrival in the tent. And so the fact of that, of those kind of miracles returning, is indicative of the fact that Rivka somehow reflected these qualities or these dimensions of Sarah. But also in her beauty, Rivka reflected to Yitzchak the image of Sarah, his mother. Right. So the fact of mentioning her beauty at the beginning, when in the context of Yitzchak bringing her to his tent and being comforted for his mother, maybe somehow is telling us that her beauty reminded him of the beauty of his mother. He brought her to the tent of his mother, and in his love of her, he was comforted after the death of his mother. And it's possible that this explanation is also a good one. Hebrew little pun here, Hesber ze yafeh. It's a beautiful explanation, also for the relationship with Yaakov and Rachel. In Parashat Toldot, we learned about the special bond between Yaakov and his mother, who loved him. We didn't read that essay. Yaakov is detached from his mother's house against his will. Rachel was the daughter of his mother's brother. And when Chazal say in Baba Batra 110, this is a new Gemara reference to me, that most children resemble their uncles. Most sons resemble their uncles. I have not looked at that Gemara. I'm not sure what it's aiming to, where it's coming from, or aiming to argue, other than the shot of this point. But when the sages say that most sons resemble particularly their mother's brothers, it's possible that they also meant that daughters resemble their father's sisters. Again, his creative expansion of that rabbinic suggestion, in which case Rachel would resemble Rivka, right, who was the sister of her father, Lavan. Rachel then is likely to reflect in her beauty the image of Rivka, the mother of Yaakov. So again, creative, interesting associations to address this related question about the imahot. What's the sort of function of their beauty? It's a matching inner and outer beauty, and it has other plot roles, and also sort of links them one to another. Okay, now coming back around to some of the earlier points. Yaakov and Rachel, the crisis of the infertility. As was explained above, this difficult, and very, very harsh breakdown in the relationship between Yaakov and Rachel flowed from the frustration that Rachel had over her being unable to bear children. We have to really dwell on the depth of this crisis, and we'll do this, by a close look at the way the Psukim describe the birth of the sons of Leah. Leah conceived and had a son, and she called him Reuven, because she said, God has seen my affliction, now my husband will love me. She conceives again and has a son, and she says, God has heard that I am hated and given me this one too, and calls his name Shimon, from the language of Shama Hashem, God has heard, Shimon. Conceives again and has a son, and says, now my husband will accompany me, because I've borne him 3 children, and therefore he called, it seems, his name Levi. The standard shot of this, which I heard for the first time from Menachem Leibtag, it seems to me completely correct. Why does a husband accompany after the birth of the third child is because the mom has room to hold two children, and now with the birth of the third child, you need another hand, literally, and so now the husband accompanies. I think that seems very correct to me. And she conceived again and bore a child and said, "This time I will express thanks to God." Therefore, she called his name Yehuda, from the language of Hoda'ah, of expressing thanks, and she stopped bearing children at that time. Leah sees in her first two sons, Reuven and Shimon, a kind of a payment from God for her suffering. She's been suffering, and God gives her these sons as a, I don't know, recompense, or I don't know, reparation seems too strong, but something in that direction. In her words about her third son, Levi, she now turns towards her husband, no longer towards God. She expresses her hope that from now on he will accompany her, because a husband is drawn towards his wife because of his love of her, or because of the need to co-parent, with, to have co-parenting between the two parents of their small children born one after another. When Leah is expressing this hope, she's not calling her son. When Leah expresses this hope, it's not she who is calling her son by his name, or proclaiming his name. Rather, it's Yaakov who calls him Levi. And it sounds like Yaakov in this way is kind of recognizing the righteousness of Leah's hope. It's just that at the time that Levi is born, this is still just a hope. We don't know if it's going to come true. Yaakov. So what he's saying here is when it says Al Kain Karashimo Levi, it's Yaakov speaking. Yaakov is sort of recognizing, Leah's hope is right. I should now be with her more, but that's still an aspirational comment. Once the fourth child is born, Yehuda, it seems like that hope that Leah had kind of put onto Levi has come true. Yaakov is presumably now spending time with her. Yaakov is now Nilva Eleha, escorting, accompanying her, because she says, now I can really thank God. What would she be? So the classic reading of this somehow is that, now that I have four children, there's a fullness to this, and I thank God about the children. Rav Meidan's reading here, which is a little bit different, is that the third child, she makes explicit her wish for her husband to be with her. And when that's the third child, and when it comes to the fourth child, and she sort of says, now I can thank God, and doesn't make any further reference to the presence or absence of Yaakov, that teaches us that her gratitude must be because that wish came true, and Yaakov was joining her, if for no other reason than to co-parent, but he is with her. And Rav Meidan says maybe even Yaakov has moved his bed, in a more permanent way into her tent, again, either because of being a feeling of greater closeness, or because of the parenting responsibilities. And therefore, this fourth son, is not named for her complaints or her hopes like his three, predecessors, but from her thankfulness to God for God's, goodness with her, or to her. Again, I think like an interesting, that sort of little switch in how he's reading the fourth son, different than I think the classic interpretation is interesting. In the wake of this process, which accompanies the birth of these four sons, Rachel understands that her world is sort of been destroyed. It says Rachel saw that she was not bearing children to Yaakov. She was jealous of her sister, and she said to Yaakov, we quoted this at the beginning, give me children, if not, I'll die. Yaakov got angry at Rachel and said, am I in place of God who is withholding, do I stand in God's place, i.e. it's God and not me who's withholding, or preventing you from being able to bear children? Rav Meidan has an interesting thought here. He says, Rachel didn't merit children, but she wants to, comfort herself with her husband who loves her, more than her sister, I don't know, sister, enemy is way too strong a word, whatever the right language is here, sister, co-wife, struggle partner. But now it's become clear that the many children that Leah has been blessed with has brought Yaakov closer and closer to Leah's tent. And Rachel is going to lose even that love of her husband, right? So Rav Meidan is sort of reading again these two dimensions of interaction, the one-to-one, and in this sense, maybe there's a little bit of differentiation of kinds of love or kinds of connection, right? One is the co-parenting partnership relationship, and the other is the one-to-one love and connection. And Rachel could console herself that she had that one-to-one love connection, even if she didn't have the co-parenting relationship. But now, after 4 children, she sees even the one-to-one love somehow slipping away, whether she can actually sense that Yaakov's feelings have changed, or just he's not even available for that because he's so pulled to Leah's tent. Either way, it's a source of tremendous distress for her. In her despair and real deep pain, she starts to suspect Yaakov that when they're having intercourse, he is somehow trying not to impregnate her in order that her beauty not be lessened. This phenomenon was known of in the world of the ancients, if you take Rashi's interpretation of Breshit 38, the story of Yehuda and Tamar, when Yehuda has marries the Bat Shua, and they have 3 children, and he marries the heir to Tamar, and Er was evil in the eyes of God, and God killed him. And then she marries Onan in levirate marriage, and it says Onan knew ki lo that the offspring would not be his, because essentially through levirate marriage, the heritage of the offspring would really be his brother's. And so it would happen that when he came to his brother's wife, to Tamar, he would spill his seed on the ground, rather than sort of through impregnating her provide offspring essentially to his brother's legacy. Rashi asks the question, why was he doing this? Even though the text gives us a straightforward answer, but why was he doing it? So as not to get her pregnant, which would diminish her beauty. So Rav Meidan, drawing off of this line from Rashi, suggests that this was a known practice in that time, and that Rachel suspected Yaakov of doing that. This suspicion of Yaakov was not correct, and that's what made Yaakov get so angry at Rachel, right? You think it's me who's preventing you from having children? No, I'm trying my best. It's not me. That's Rav Meidan's suggested, reading of what's underlying her anger, even though again he's also suggested strongly, what else might be going on there, but a really interesting additional layer to the relationship.
Why does Rashi negate the plain reason given in the text?
Yeah, it's a great question. Hold on a second. I'm just going to see if I have that Rashi with any notes. 1 second. I just have my Rashi right here. Hold on. Interesting. Hold on. Okay, so let me see if I can put this together.
Did you just stump him?
No, so I actually realized now that I didn't even read it carefully. Look at I didn't read the Rashi carefully. I was just assuming. Rashi says Vilama haya mashchit zaro. Right. This is about Onan, and where the answer was straightforward. Rashi says, why did spill his seed? So we have to add a couple of layers of midrashic interpretation here. I'll just read you the whole Rashi. This is a Rashi on the previous pasuk, 2 psukim earlier. Vahi bechor Yehuda ra be'enei Hashem vayimitehu Hashem. The firstborn of Yehuda was evil in the eyes of God, and God killed him. And Rashi there on ra be'enei Hashem says kira'ato shel Onan, right? Because we know what Onan did and why. We don't know what did and what was wrong with it. So why was he evil in the eyes of God? So Rashi says kira'ato shel Onan mashchit zaro. He would also destroy his seed. Shneimar ba'onan vayamet gamoto. Because when God kills Onan, it says God killed him too. So we make that connection and say, they were doing the same thing, but the reason was different, right? We know the reason why Onan did it. Why was doing it when that same reason wouldn't apply? So thank you very much for picking up on that. And I think the answer seems, meaning within the midrashic framework, makes sense. Great. Okay. 9:13. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen again. We'll keep going. As you can see, this is one of these Rav Meidans where there are links between the different pieces, but it's not one whole comprehensive point. Okay, but continuing the link, so we're sort of playing the story forward. How does Rachel, in this moment of crisis where she feels that she's lost, she's not able to bear children, and she's losing the love of Yaakov, either, again, because his feelings towards Leah have developed, or he's just not available to Rachel. So what does she do? Rachel suggests and, offers and demands, so to speak, from Yaakov the following. She says, Rachel said, "Here is my maidservant Bilhah, come unto her, and she will bear children upon my knees, and I will be built up also from her." Similar language of Sarah in giving Hagar, Sarai in giving Hagar. And Rachel gave Bilhah, her maidservant, to her husband, and Yaakov came to her. Within Rachel's words, there is this longing for a son who would be born on her lap, and that she would be able to raise. Similarly, right, so that's sort of at the emotional level, what she's seeking, even if it's not so straightforward that that's what happens when you give a maidservant, but that's her kind of vision of what she wants to happen. Similarly, Rav Meidan says, and I don't know whether this is what the verification of this is, there can be, in an instance like this, also some kind of hormonal influence, for positive hormonal influence for her infertility that would improve or bring about her capacity to bear children. Maybe some sense that, having a small child on your lap stimulates some hormones or initiates some process that could enhance her fertility. But it's possible that Rachel has an additional goal. The busying that she would have in raising her children from Bilhah would draw Yaakov back to her tent in order to help her in raising them, right? So it's not just, have a child with my maidservant and somehow that will be accrued to my account. But this particular language of let her bear the child on my lap, and I will be built up from her. Again, it's not just the sort of I'll have one in my column, but it's actually I'll be an active parent, and that will shift the balances a little bit and start to bring Yaakov back, back to me. Was Rachel right in this hope? It's possible that she was, as emerges from the name of Bilhah's second son, which shows sort of Rachel's now victory in this tough struggle with Leah. Bilhah conceived again, the maidservant of Rachel, and gave birth to a second son to Yaakov. And Rachel said, again, this is hard to translate, wrestled the wrestlings of God, spun the spinnings of God. Let's see how the translation has it here. Hold on. Contending. I have twisted with turnings to God. Any of these possibilities. Thank you, Miriam. With my sister, I have also, won or showed myself able, and she called his name Naphtali. So somehow this, struggle with Leah comes back out, and a sense of a victory in the struggle. Of course, again, that language of, Yaakov's wrestling with the Ish later on, Vayar ki lo yachol lo. So that sort of language of struggle is strong in this context. Leah answers back in the war, as it says right after this. Leah saw that she had not borne children, took Zilpah, her maidservant, and gave her to Yaakov for a wife. And the name of the first child of Zilpah that Leah had given also, testifies to the struggle. Leah says, Ba Gad, and she called his name Gad. Rashi and the Midrash explain the name based on the way it's written, Bagad, as one word from the language of Begida, of treason, of traitorousness. According to Rashi, the treason is in the very fact of marrying a maidservant. So the God testifies to the kind of not infidelity, but the blemish on the fidelity or on the loyalty that emerges here. It's true that this marriage between Yaakov and Zilpah was at Leah's initiative, but we also have something like this in what Sarah says to Abraham after he marries Hagar, which is something that she initiated, right? So there's sort of this response of, yes, I gave this wife to you, maidservant to you, but now I feel that you're in some way unfaithful, and the child sort of bears that burden in its name. According to our explanation, maybe the treason was not Yaakov's marriage to Zilpah, but Yaakov's return to Rachel's tent. Right, so she calls the next child's name like treason, in the sense of, Yaakov, you were disloyal to me in going back to Rachel, and I'm sort of like, this child is an attempt to name that and reverse that course. Again, it's all, extremely painful to read about, but Rav Meidan is trying to suggest that this is clearly going on, and actually should be read into, read kind of maximally into the story, because it's really the main plot dimension of the story right now. The wrestling between the two sisters over Yaakov's presence in their tent. And again, this gets played out sort of with the children. Leah's anger at Rachel is also found in this story of Reuven and the mandrakes, where she says, it's enough that you took my husband, and now you also want to take my son's mandrakes. Although it doesn't say she got angry, and Rav Meidan is trying to suggest that she could have responded in a more minimal fashion, but she spills out her feelings here, and we can see how high the tension is. Rachel's yielding Yaakov that night indicates how great her desire is for those dudaim. But maybe also it's a recognition of the rightness of Leah's claim in the wake of what Rachel did in this kind of the wrestlings of God in wrestling with her. Okay, I think we are close to the end. The marriage of two sisters. Our words until here express a terrible picture of tension and competition between Rachel and Leah. It's possible that in the notion of Maseh Avot Siman Lebanim, that what happens, to the earlier generations is a foretelling or an indication of what will happen in the future generations. Following that approach, maybe this is the background for the Torah's prohibition of marrying two sisters. Close examination of the Torah's prohibited sexual relationships teaches that the sister of one's wife is not a complete erva. It's not an absolutely prohibited relationship. And the proof of this is a person whose wife has died is allowed to then marry her sister, which is not meaning now that first wife has died. You can't marry two sisters in life, but after your wife has died, now you can marry her sister. That's a sort of a minor permission within that type of relationship, which is not the case in the other prohibited sexual relationships, which are also prohibited even after the death of a prohibited one. The kind of other prohibited ones remain. The foundation for this prohibition to marry two sisters is kind of inferred from this verse, and you shall not take a woman along with her sister, as to creating this conflict, maybe or binding them up in this difficult bond, and uncovering her nakedness in her lifetime. It seems like the prohibition is in the changing the relationship of two sisters who are meant to love each other and support each other into these conflicting parties, who are struggling with each other, jealous of each other, etc. And the terrible consequences of Yaakov's marriage to these two sisters, which rolls into goes on into starting from their jealousy of one another to the hatred of the children of one towards the children of the other, all the way to the sale of Yosef, seems like it leads to this expansive prohibition of marrying two sisters. Again, Rav Meidan's link between narrative and law, really saying that this emerged in light of the story of Yaakov's marriage, and sort of came to be clear that the impact of a relationship like this is destructive to the fabric of the family of the sisters, and therefore becomes not allowed. Okay, last little bit. We've dealt now a little bit with Yaakov's love for Rachel, but we can't conclude this chapter without dealing with the hatred for Leah, put it in quotes as we'll see. And God saw that Leah was hated, and God opened her womb. What is the nature of this hatred in the house of Yaakov, our patriarch? The Radak explains, God saw that Leah was hated. Not that Yaakov hated her, rather he loved her. It's just that because he loved Rachel more than Leah, Leah is called hated. In other words, relative to the love for Rachel, she was hated. And similarly, we have a pasuk later on that talks about if a man marries two women, one is loved and one is hated. Doesn't really mean one is loved and one is hated, just means there's one is loved more than the other. As opposed to the Radak, the Ramban explains that Yaakov did hate Leah because of her deception, the one that led him to have to work 7 more years and get all caught up in this whole business of two sisters, right? Yaakov did not intend to marry two sisters. He intended to marry Rachel. He got married to Leah, didn't want to give up on his love for Rachel, spent 7 more years working for that, although he married her after just a week. And all the consequences flowed from there. It's actually, when I got to this point in the essay, I was like, oh yes, that's true. He didn't intend to marry two sisters. It's almost forget about it, as the story unfolds. But that wasn't his vision. His vision was to marry Rachel. With this, and so because of that, says the Ramban, he did hate Leah. With this, even according to the Ramban, this hatred was still limited in some way. He had sex with her, and they had children. They lived a family life together. 7 children, 6 sons and a daughter. He agreed to her request to take Zilpah, and in the end, charged his sons to bury him alongside her in Marat HaMachpelah. Okay, so I don't know if he means that the Ramban himself says all of this, or if Rav Meidan is just saying, I know the Ramban says he hated her, but it can't have been a vile hatred. Look at all these, points to the fact that they lived a life together, even if he harbored a negative feeling towards her forever over the situations that she, and what role did she have relative to Laban is another question, but that he felt her somehow responsible for or placed on her. It seems like the Torah, treats very harshly Leah's deception at the time of their sexual encounter, right, on their wedding night. A child born from deceptive circumstances in intimacy is considered somehow blemished, and we'll deal with this at length when we get to the portion dealing with the sin of Ruvain and Bilhah. There too, in my understanding of the story, says Rav Meidan, there was a similar kind of deception, and as a result, Ruvain loses the firstbornship, the priesthood, and the throne. Hatred between a husband and wife is only countenanced or understood by the Torah to happen under one circumstance. That is when the husband suspects his wife of adultery. This kind of suspicion brings a real hatred into the house, and that's why the Torah in the Sota portion says that God's name can even be erased into the water in order to bring peace and overturn that hatred that comes from that suspicion. An example for the hatred that comes from this kind of suspicion of adultery is found in the portion of the Motzi Shemra, the person who accuses his wife of having had sex before their marriage. When a person takes a wife and comes to her and then hates her and makes the claim that she has makes a claim about her previous sexual history, and says, I took this woman and drew near to her, and I didn't find that she had virginity. Right, so we have this sort of sense of the hatred itself kind of indicates a negative relationship, and the husband, Rav Meidan goes on, can also justify the hatred for his wife even just with the claim of her infidelity or harlotry. That's what we have in the place where the Torah talks about divorce. If a man marries a woman, has sex with her, and she doesn't find favor in his eyes, he's found something unfit in her, and he writes her a bill of divorce and gives it to her, and then her later husband also comes to hate her and writes a bill of divorce, etc., etc. Here too, the Torah seems to make this link between the hatred and ervat davar. We don't know what this ervat davar is, but using the language of erva, of something that has to do with a sexual impropriety, we have that link. So this is the usual Rav Meidan concordance style approach of noticing that the places where hatred comes up in a marital relationship in the Torah are places where there is a suspicion of infidelity, and that sort of reflects back on the idea that if indeed we're going to say snua Leah, that could only make sense relating to a sense of Yaakov's that had to do with the deception in their sexual relationship. As was said, the deception of Leah at her father's instruction, command, was considered to be something which bordered on a sexual impropriety, having sex in a way without having full understanding or full consciousness, and from there then comes this harsh consequence, which is the hatred. Let us close this difficult chapter with the charitable reading that the Ramban offers for this harsh action of Leah's, which is, and God knows that she did this only to marry this tzaddik, and God had compassion upon her. So again, trying to read a charitable lens, through a charitable lens, this deceptive action. So okay, a lot, and still again the threads are a little bit loose. But what we covered was sort of the question of what was the nature of Yaakov's love for Rachel. If it was really based on appearance, then how could it last? Indeed, we saw lots of challenges and tensions, but on the other hand, we had lots of indications that love did carry through. Now, let's circle back to the question of that, the beauty as the basis for the love, and ask, what does the beauty really mean? With the matriarchs in general, it's understood to be some connection between inner and outer beauty. And with each of the individual matriarchs, it has some additional plot dimension, either the way it creates, vulnerability and risk in foreign contexts, or the way it reflects a connection to the previous generation of matriarch, from Rivka to Sarah, and from Rachel back to Rivka. Then, coming back to Yaakov and Rachel's relationship, and delving into the real, tension and conflict that they had, centered around the Rachel's inability to bear children, and seeing all of that sort of play out through the process of the birth of all the different children and their naming, showing us kind of how Yaakov was shifting towards Leah's tent, and then Rachel trying to pull him back, and Leah trying to pull him back through the different introduction of the shvachot, and again, it's interpreting that through how we understood the names. From there, then coming to say, through all of this, we learn the lesson that this is not a healthy kind of relationship, and maybe this serves as the basis for the fact that the Torah prohibits, even though it has like a slight limitation to it, fundamentally prohibits the marriage of someone, a man to two sisters for sure in life, and then comes back again to look at the differentiation between Yaakov's love for Rachel and his hatred for Leah, and was that a true hatred? One approach that it is just a less love, and the other approach that to extent to which there really was negative feeling, that negative feeling circled back to a sense of the dishonesty in their original liaison, and that is sort of the basis that the Torah recognizes for real marital tension. Questions or comments? Dad, go for it.
If Yaakov is hating Leah because she deceived him on their marriage night, he's ignoring the midrash that Rachel was complicit in that deception.
Yeah.
And, I mean, she gave Leah code words, all kinds of things to make sure that marriage would be consummated.
Yep, no question. Rav Meidan does not mention that midrash, and I agree that that provides a whole different reading. And of course, it's as always with midrash, you choose which ones to include and which ones not to. And he obviously knows that midrash. Sometimes you could imagine him introducing it and then somehow having a counter reading. Maybe he doesn't have a counter reading for it, so it just excludes it from this reading. Yeah, good point. Important to consider.
When did things change for Jacob? He is very much in different from his grandfather and his father in that the matriarchs work their hardest to ensure that one son makes it as the receiver of the Yerusha. All of a sudden, we've got 12. How did that happen?
Beautiful question. Yeah, I mean, certainly after the fact, this sense of the expansive lineage emerges. Why is it only then? I mean, I have to think more about that. I mean, it's certainly clearly a branching out point. But is there, what would Rav Meidan answer? What's the kind of intertextual or underlying midrashic explanation for why at this generation? Really good question. I have to dwell on a little more. I don't have any immediate answer.
Okay.
It's the growth of a nation. You can't grow a nation with one. You have to have 12. It's like how all the nations grow out of 12 tribes.
Yes. Yeah. So Sally absolutely is right. That, at some point,
That's
the question
arguing
is,
after the fact.
why this generation? Why does Yaakov merit to be the one, or why now in the third generation? Why not in 5 generations? I don't know. Those are all sort of second order questions. And there's no question that exactly as you said, a nation can't be created out of just one chosen progenitor in each generation. So that it's certainly necessary. The sort of why him or why now, I guess, are the open questions. Dad?
I don't know if this makes sense, but I think Esav had 12 sons. I think they all became princes or kings.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is a way for Yaakov to even things out. And he had to have 12 sons also in order to, be at least equal with Esav.
Very interesting. Great. We see them, I think, in the end of Parshat Vayishlach. So we can keep our eye out for that. Great. Isaac, looks like a hand on the edge of the screen. Go for it. Unmute yourself, please. Didn't work yet. Love to hear you. If all else fails, if you're on a laptop, you can always hold down the space bar. It should unmute you as long as you're pressing it. We don't hear you yet. Isaac, just so you know, I don't hear you yet. No. Okay. All right. You can always call me or email me or type it into the chat if you want. Sorry to miss it. Any other last questions or comments before we wrap up? Okay. Great group. Thank you all. Great to learn together. Look forward to next week. Love to mom and dad and to all. Great to see you. Shavua Tov.